Robin Ayoub from the Localization Fireside Chat, and welcome to another episode. Today we are recording episode 179 on the channel, and I'm very still surprised a little bit when I say 179. I can't believe how the time has flown since I started mid-2023 and the number of respected guests that has been on the channel since then. And I'm so grateful for all the preparation that the guests do and get ready for this type of conversation. And I'm also grateful for the listeners, for the audience who's been keeping this channel alive and going. So just to report to the listeners and to the audience, we're averaging about, on a 7-day basis, about 2 million views on the podcasting channels, on the audio pieces, on the audio platforms, and about 50,000 downloads on a 28 days basis on all of our YouTube episodes that we put out there, on all of the shorts and variety of pieces that we put out there. So thank you. Thank you for keeping us part of the conversation. Thanks for keeping this conversation going. My guest of honor today is Mike Elkins. I really appreciate Mike joining me today. Today's conversation is about modern risks, not compliance checklists, not fear-based cybersecurity narratives that most people are aware of, but how technology and human behavior, governance, and capital markets are colliding in ways that most executives, in some cases, are underestimating and misunderstanding. Mike operates at the intersection. That's my understanding from your background, Mike. Correct me if I'm wrong. At the intersection of high-stake digital risk, national security, healthcare, finance, real estate. He has led a $100 million modernization initiative, contributed to a human-centered cybersecurity research at NIST, advised on AI and quantum risks at Vanguard, and now serves as a chief human information security officer at Humanis Technologies. Mike, welcome to the conversation.
Wonderful, Robin. Thanks. Pleasure to be here. And thank you to the audience for participating.
And thanks so much for being part of this conversation as well. Mike, as we say on this channel, everybody's got a story. Let's start with this one. What's your story? What got you here, Mike? What happened here?
All right. So looks like we're back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
You confirm we're recording?
Yeah, I can take care of that. Don't worry.
Riverside had an issue, but okay, awesome. So thank you for the question. So my story is a little bit, maybe somewhat different than most folks. Got a girl pregnant at 16, became a dad at 17, and that's really what helped propel me into the world of technology. You know, my co-op in high school was working in the computer lab, and then I just said yes to a lot of projects and mostly pushed myself beyond my comfort zone and put myself in positions where it was sink or swim. And, you know, as a practitioner, I'm very much learn on the job, getting thrown into the fire with, you know, all kinds of different companies. I've been grateful to work for million, billion, and trillion-dollar organizations. As you mentioned, I've contributed to building out human-centered cybersecurity frameworks for NIST at the national level. I've worked a couple of different areas to help at the national level, some executive orders across that would really help industry be able to deal with some of the modern threats that we're facing, and also help industry have the ability and capability to take offensive cybersecurity actions under certain rules of engagement. So very much practitioner. I've wore a lot of hats, right? I've worked in first, second, third level support, software development, R&D, infrastructure, architecture, you name it, right? And a lot of what I can bring to our clients and our organization now is really from just being in the room with the right people at the right times, going through some challenging situations. And, you know, coming from an experiential learner perspective, it allows me an ability to connect a lot of different dots that maybe somebody would miss if they're more academic or, you know, more at the executive level, because I can wear the executive hat, I can wear the practitioner hat, and everything in between.
Well diverse, and the Swiss Army knife, I would call it, in your profession. So, Mike, you began in healthcare, right? In healthcare IT. What did working inside of a hospital teach you about risk that most, chief information security officers probably will never learn? Healthcare tend to be different industry altogether, specifically on, you know, privacy, private information access, personal identifiable information, those types of things. Is there any learnings that you can attribute it to that phase in your career, in your life?
Yeah, so both in healthcare and finance, those are areas where, you know, working at Vanguard, working at Siemens and Cerner Healthcare, even outside of working with Siemens and Cerner, I worked for a number of different healthcare institutions, helping them re-architect and build things. I was an enterprise architect for Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. For example, I helped co-develop what they call a staff duress badge. So if somebody's in the emergency room and there's a violent attack, they hit a silent bank button or they pull on a ripcord for a card and Batman comes and saves the day. So being in healthcare, both from working in healthcare and healthcare IT, but also I cared for my father when he was terminal with cancer for over a decade. So I got to see a lot of different perspectives of healthcare, good, bad, and different patient, provider, building electronic medical records and softwares and systems. And from a pure risk management perspective, there's things that you would never expect that you would have to very quickly adapt and evolve to. And I'll give you one perfect example. I was just telling the story last night. In the world of healthcare, they have what's called critical clinical errors. And it's an error in the software system that is so mission critical that it has the potential to impact patient safety and patient lives. And, this was years ago, but one of the CCE's critical clinical errors that I helped spearhead was our electronic medical record system did not have the capability at the time to change gender. So there was a patient that went through gender reassignment surgery. They went from a male to a female. And in the medical record system, we were not able to flip that from male to female. And what that means is transitioning from a male to a female, the female is going to get different kinds of care, different kinds of supplements and things in their care. And we very quickly had to put together a band of brothers and sisters to, in less than 48 hours, understand the requirements, patch the system, and get that system rolled out and deployed, not just to one healthcare institution, but to all of our healthcare clients. And at the time, we were Siemens Healthcare. We were like the number 3 healthcare EMR provider like in the world. So it's very important for us to be able to very quickly, rapidly evolve. And, that's one thing that I never thought I would ever have to get involved in. It's like a mission critical thing because of a gender reassignment surgery. And we very quickly had to patch that because, again, if we didn't, it would impact patient safety and patient lives. Last thing I'll touch on is working in the healthcare sector has given me a totally different perspective because it's one of the most highly regulated industries. The level of risk that they see, both technical and the human element, is astronomical. And one of the things in the healthcare world is most times when somebody goes to a facility or an institution or an emergency room in particular, right, those people are being seen not at their best moments, right? They're having some sort of mental or physical challenge that requires additional support. And having that level of empathy when we're working and dealing in those mission critical areas that really impact people's lives is such a blessing to be a part of.
As you were telling the story about the staff duress badge, I had that on my next item for you, but I'm glad you attacked it before you're reading my questions. I think, which is always good to be in sync with the guests, I guess, on the same. Now, what did you try to solve with that? Like other technology probably was not able to solve it. What was the base idea there and how did you do that? How did you develop this?
Yeah, so the requirements effectively were the statistics. I'm sure it's evolved a lot, especially since COVID, because this was pre-COVID. The statistics of the amount of attacks that happen inside hospital facilities is pretty high, actually, right? It's not super widely reported, but, you see it on the news every once in a while where somebody's in the ER and there's a drunk driver who's in a bed and they lose their shit and they start wailing on a nurse or just create a bunch of issues. So the requirement really was, what can we do to increase the speed of response while allowing the healthcare workers to be able to operate in a safe facility, right? So there's kind of the big 2 requirements. And then from there, at the time at Thomas Jefferson, they do a lot of research and R&D work throughout TJU and a number of healthcare institutions. So I wound up working with an outside firm to co-develop a physical piece of hardware. And we did a lot of trials and tribulations, right? Is it like a Star Trek beacon that you press on your chest? Is it like an ID badge that you hang from your waist that you would just pull from a cord? And, through a little bit of trial and error and testing, we figured out what was at least the best physical piece of device, and something, not much bigger than iPhone case, right? Something that was small enough and discreet enough that if it was pressed, then security was alerted. You're not alerting the bad actor at the time because, you don't necessarily want to let them know. You want the people to come in and kind of squash whatever kind of violence or issues are going on. So we took the requirements, settled on the hardware designs. We actually had about 2 or 3 different style hardware designs. Some were more thin, some were a little bit more flexible. And then what we had to do was build out the infrastructure behind that, right? So once you have the physical device, it's how can that device communicate? How can we make sure that device has high availability and uptime? How can we make sure that in a world where, it's a safety first and important thing, if somebody presses that badge, it works when it's intended to work. And that came down to, how do we rewire our campuses, our infrastructure on our campuses to be able to support that? What was the right level of technology to use? We wound up choosing Bluetooth low energy. So it's Bluetooth, but it's a much lower energy, better spread, a little bit different radiuses. And then we had to refit and retrofit all the campuses with Bluetooth LE devices and receivers and go through the testing iteration. And then obviously, you want to get it in the hands of the folks who are going to be using this every day. So very quickly, rapidly evolve from requirements to hardware to the infrastructure it needs to support it, get it into the hands of the people to say, okay, now how durable is this? Is this going to work? If you press it, what's the actual response time of the network and the systems? And then when Batman comes to save the day and security comes to help them, is this really increasing kind of the safety and security of the organization and the healthcare workers? And surprisingly, it did. It made tremendous amount of work. And, I don't have any statistics to tell you how much we were able to actually move the needle, but in some things, when it truly comes down to life and death and human safety, you don't necessarily always go by what some statistics go by. You go by what's going to have the best human outcomes coming out of it.
Now, this is phenomenal. To develop something from the ground up, you must have been involved in so many details. I mean, I recall back in the days when I had to be involved in developing something like this. My background is in the technology as well, where you have to line up suppliers, engineers designing things, go to manufacturing, put all that stuff together, and then trial, testing, and readjusting, etc. So it's not an easy task to develop a handheld device in the way you guys have done it. That's a tremendous. Is it still operational now, Mike?
As far as I understand, yeah.
And
I'm sure it's had a couple of iterations.
Did any other institution use the same idea, or just to stay at Thomas Jefferson?
So other institutions use something similar, and then as you were talking about the beginning process, right? It's very much a decision between buy versus build. And There were competitive products that were out there in the marketplace that would solve for most of these things. But Thomas Jefferson being, a healthcare organization that does a lot of academic and research, right? It was something that we wanted to build. But it was interesting as I went about that, as I was looking at the different vendors and people in the marketplace, one of the other things that a lot of healthcare institutions will use is, are you familiar with, it used to be called LoJack for a car. So somebody stole your car. Yes,
that's right, yeah.
Well, they have what we call baby LoJack, right? So when you have a child, your child is born in the hospital, that child effectively has a LoJack system around them so that, unfortunately, in the reality we live in, people have tried to steal babies from hospitals, right? So you effectively have a baby LoJack system that would make sure that this is parent A, this is parent B, they're associated with child C, and you kind of have that correlation. So as I was trying to figure out this whole staff duress badge design and looking at buy versus build and checking people in the marketplace, I was actually able to find a competitive product that solved the baby LoJack problem and two other problems in the organization. They wound up not purchasing the product and going with it, but of course, as an architect and infrastructure person, I certainly was like, hey, we're looking at this, that's a focus area, but also we should be looking at these other two things because this one product solves 2 to 3 problems instead of having 2 to 3 other products.
So you were able to connect all the dots that you require in terms of putting a solution together in one product, Mike, right?
Yeah, connect all the dots and, be kind of the champion for the organization with the vendor, but also internally to help get other people on board to say, okay, we had Baby LoJack and these other 3 systems. Does it make sense to evaluate a single vendor? Will our costs be lower? Will our efficacy be higher? Will our requirements be more met with solutions like that?
So you contributed to around the same topic where human are involved in cybersecurity. You contribute to NIST SP 1332 on a human-centered cybersecurity. What are the most frameworks that they're still missing? First, can you tell us what you contributed, and then what do you think still missing that still need to be fixed?
Wonderful question. The NIST special publication that we did was a result of a conference that we did 2023 at the tail end of Hacker Summer Camp. So Black Hat and DEF CON, we did it at the tail end of it. And we've done 3 and we're planning the 4th one now, which will be in the Philadelphia area. And that's with a nonprofit organization called the Cognitive Security Institute, CSI. We're C3 and we are quite literally defining what cognitive security is. How do we defend human agency in the world of narrative manipulation, disinformation, and digital debauchery? And so that NIST Special Pub 1392 came as a result of a conference that we did where we put together a bunch of leaders across industry, government, academia, and we not only talked about some of the most pressing problems of today. But we also talked about what are we actually going to do to solve them. So if you read through that NIST special pub, what's really interesting is you'll identify 5 focus areas that make humans more susceptible to ransomware or phishing or clicking on attacks. And out of those 5, 2 of them are overwhelm and too much information. And I think one of our prior podcast guests, Mr. Win Schwartauer, hopefully
That's right.
touched on TMI a little bit and his bullshit detector a little bit. So there's a lot of like similarities there, right? But being able to talk through how can we actually solve for some of those things. So that special pub is an output of that. Now, about 2.5 weeks ago, we just did another conference at Tampa. So we were at the University of South Florida. It was a conference that was co-sponsored by NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies. Similar, we had about 60 to 70 people across industry, government, academia. What this one was more focused on most recently in Tampa was to build out human-centered cybersecurity frameworks that NIST can actually inject into their NIST CSF, which is their cybersecurity framework. So being able to be a part of something where, first of all, the dialogue and the conversations and the brainstorming with so much brain power in a room like that is just, it tickles me fancy. Like it's such an amazing thing to be a part of when you get in a room with so many smart people, because you just have 12,000 different levels of conversations going on at the same time. But ultimately, we do these things not just to talk about some of the challenges, but how can we solve them? But also, how can we elevate this so that folks all across the country, right, in for-profit and nonprofit, million, billion, and trillion-dollar companies, how can they be a little bit better in terms of how we manage cybersecurity? But how can we manage cybersecurity with the human element? And I think that's one of the challenges I see in the world of technology and cyber. Look, I love technology. It's given me a great life. It's afforded my family a lot of opportunities, and it's helped me grow immensely. But we often miss the human element of things. And with the Cognitive Security Institute, what we do is we blend not just the technical, but we blend the behavioral sciences. So there's a lot of psychologists as part of our group where we look at not just, okay, if somebody was impacted by a phishing attack, what happened? What was the behavioral science behind that? Were they overwhelmed? Were they, what was their behavioral state or mental state as they were going through and clicking on some of those ransomwares? And what that allows us to do is create better frameworks and better ways to categorize some of these risks and threats that we're seeing out in the landscape, while also creating human-centered ways to solve for these. Because I think like 85% of budgets that are spent in IT are spent on tools and software, right? Buy a new router, buy a new piece of software. But those 85% of that funding still does not solve for the human element of cybersecurity and technology.
When I did the podcast with your colleagues, Win Schwartau and Len No, we talked about in the first one, we talked about cognitive cybersecurity, where, a lot of companies nowadays, the easy thing to do is buy tools, buy boxes, hardware, whatever it is to solve for cybersecurity. Meanwhile, according to my guest at the time, when the biggest flaw in this is the biggest risk factor is the human. And then Len calls it the attack surface. Human are the attack surface, which is very, very interesting. Which now, if you go around to any corporation around the US, Canada, and the Western world, I was up to recently employed by a large corporation where I had to spend almost weekly training. I had to take weekly training in cybersecurity. And it's all about social engineering, be educated about social engineering, how attackers are trying to spoof you or make you think that there is something interesting in an email that you mentioned earlier, phishing. It used to be like, on a weekly basis, we had to take those training. But the education is changing, obviously, but the threat is changing too. So the people who are developing these things, I'm sure they have psychologists as much as the solution has psychologists. And they're studying all the human behavior and trying to figure out what is the weakest link? How do I get in? And it seems to me like if you look down the details of every cyber attack that you're probably more familiar with this than I am, you would see that most likely there's a human element involved in most of them today.
Yeah, it depends on what report you look at, but it's something like anywhere from 70 to 95% of ransomware and challenges in an IT environment are a result of the human element. Maybe it's human error, right? We're overwhelmed, not reading the email to see that it's, a spear phishing attempt and we click on a link, or other elements of just human behavior, right? And we often miss that. So the statistics of how many times a human is kind of, I hate to use this term because I'm not a fan of when people say humans are the weakest link, is actually we're the strongest link. Yes, we are probably the most susceptible attack surface, but saying humans are the weakest link is uh, hopefully as an industry we can be a little bit better on some of those
Behind us?
terminology. Yeah, right. And it's interesting because you mentioned psychology and the bad actors. I mean, these bad actors are run like billion-dollar enterprise organizations, right? They have personal time off, they have 401ks, they actually have psychologists on staff that will help the people who are scamming grandma and grandpa out of their life savings deal with the fact that they are stealing from elderly and vulnerable populations, right? And it's like, okay, we know that the bad guys are using psychology to help support the efforts, but they're also on the flip side, the bad actors are using textbook college psychology to manipulate artificial intelligence and agentic systems, right? You can social engineer an AI system the same way you can social engineer a human. And if you were to go back and look at, Machiavelli and all the different dark triads and different aspects of psychology, it becomes a lot easier to manipulate and deceive if you're a bad actor. Now, on the good side, I never thought, almost 28 years ago when I got in technology, that I would have to understand psychology and the human aspect of technology, right? It's the matrix, it's ones and zeros. And, I wanted to be a hacker when I was a kid. So I got into technology and all the cool stuff. And I love the way the industry has evolved because I'm seeing a lot more people with academic degrees in cyber psychology. One of my dear friends, Eric, he's a former tier one special operator. He quite literally is a guy who was hacking systems and shooting people at the same time for the military. And this gentleman went out and wound up getting a master's degree in cyber psychology. And he applies a lot of the learnings from being a top performing tier one operator into the world of technology. And it's so interesting when you talk to people who really understand, cognitive neuroscience and brain science and, things like neurochemistry and dopamine and serotonin and cortisol and how that all affects us. I would have never thought, a long time ago that these were things that I would have had to know. And I'm fascinated by this stuff. Like the fact that I get to work with Cognitive Security Institute for the last 3+ years now, really like blazing the trail on what cognitive security is and how do we maintain that brain capacity. It's so much more than just ones and zeros and firewalls and blacklists for routing, right? There's a lot more that goes on in the human element.
But there are a few things that perhaps, and I think I'm just, one interesting idea, you just gave me an idea as we were talking earlier. Maybe what we should do on the channel here is do a panel discussion between the three top guests, yourself, Mike, Len, and Win. Maybe address this topic in one joint session, I would call it. That would be an interesting conversation. But one of the things that we talked about before, and I'd love your take on it, is that human unknowingly becoming more vulnerable, not necessarily because they want to, just because, let's say, and here's an example, for instance, using Alexa at home or Google Home or whatever you're using, those devices are listening to your conversation. Like I'll be talking to my wife about, I don't know, we're going to go on vacation somewhere. Then the next thing I open my email and I'm flooded with vacation offers and I did not sign up for them. They're just coming in because somebody connected the dots of what I said and what hopefully they're going to sell me down the road. So there is something that the human can control. And there are, like with the technology proliferation, the way it is right now, you would probably agree that there are things the human out of their control. Am I correct?
I would say more is out of our control than is in our control. Privacy, there's no such thing as privacy. 100% of everything that is done digitally is tracked, monitored, logged, and put somewhere in a database. Now, maybe it's just for pure marketing perspective. Maybe it's for, a company like Palantir where, they're looking across, a whole bunch of different threat vectors. And it's an interesting perspective because years ago when the digital world really started kind of evolving, I don't know that anybody ever could have predicted that, we're so addicted to staring at a rectangle for hours and hours and hours a day, whether it's a laptop, a phone, an iPad, a Kindle, whatever the device is, right? And then you add on to the fact that you've got all of these different smart home devices. Food for thought, I actually just ripped out every single one of my smart home devices with the exception of my thermostat for the privacy reasons, because I just got so sick and tired of knowing that my stuff's being monitored and talked about. Even recording a podcast like this, I'm sure if we were to say something, one of our digital devices is going to pick it up and you're going to get an advertisement for There's something coming out of this, right? So there's some good and not so good that comes around with what goes on in the digital world. But I equate a lot of cybersecurity to financial literacy. And this is a term that, I'm open to being challenged on, by the way. But we've been screaming about financial literacy in America for 150 years.
Well, every country is. I mean,
Right,
not just the US. Probably
right.
Canada has the same problem.
Right, right. And, there's tons of books, there's academic education, there's, local community education. And even the people who go through the education, they still necessarily don't take all the steps to be financially literate, right? Maybe they're not investing correctly for retirement or whatever the case may be. I equate cybersecurity to financial literacy. We've been screaming Win Schwartauer, right? Your prior guest. Win was testifying before Congress in 1991 about digital Pearl Harbors. In Congress, people were asking this guy in 1991, Mr. Schwartauer, why would the bad guys ever want to even use this thing called the internet? And I'm like, how misguided are some of these folks, right? Because there's so much that goes on, so much tracking, so much logging. I mean, you hear stories of people who are convicted of crimes because, somebody used their digital footprint or their digital device or an Alexa device. Oh, I think there was one story. There was a guy who was convicted of like murdering his spouse because the Alexa device heard them arguing. The police were able to get that report and then get some of the actual transcripts. And that's one of the things that they used to convict him, which is a good thing, right? You do murder, you should go to jail and be convicted. But on the flip side is how much of that is just like there's no privacy anymore. And even if you take away all our devices, there's so much surveillance with cameras in the streets, electric vehicles that you use a Tesla. They have like 8 cameras on a Tesla that are recording 24/7. How many people walk by Teslas and their brain thinks, oh, that camera is recording all the time?
Yeah. You just reminded me, the company I established a few months ago, 9 Networks, there's a person who's related to me. My nephew works with me. And the other day I just found out, because I was on a joint call with him. He's like mid-30s. He's a data scientist. He's a professor at university. He teaches math, physics, and computer science. And somebody asked him on the phone, he said, can I get your LinkedIn profile so I can connect with you? And I didn't know that. He surprised the heck out of me. He says, I don't have any social media presence. I said, later on, I said, are you crazy? You don't have any social media presence? He says, nope, I just have my phone. It's like that age, like mid-30s, everybody's on their Instagram doing
I mean, there's a reason. I have a LinkedIn account. I have, other socials, but I don't post. I don't put anything out there. It doesn't add enough value to me to share all that intimate details out there with the world for somebody to judge or use against me in future.
Sure.
Sure. And it's funny, we talk about Len No. The first time I met Len, we was in Vegas a couple of years ago at Hacker Summer Camp, and we met through a very mutual friend, my buddy Chris, again, filmed the documentary on Len. And, we were at a local pub having a black hat dinner with a whole bunch of people. And at the end of the dinner, I went up and, I love Len like a brother. So I go up, I give him a hug. I'm like, hey, man, love you. Can't wait to see you next time. And as I'm hugging him, I whispered in his ear, I'm like, I know you're stealing all my shit right now. Because, he's got 11 implant devices. So as I'm hugging him, I'm like, oh, great. Like, I just, I put myself at harm's way because now he's got absolutely everything on me. But Len's not the only one. There's like at least 1,000 people out there like Len with a bunch of implant devices. And we talk about risk management and risk mitigation. I was at a CISO's house the other day for a publicly traded company. She was having some trouble with her smart home. So I was there to help kind of unfurl what some of the challenges were. And I actually gave her Human Hacked, which is Len's book. And I think it's Human Hacked. Don't go quote me on that. But I gave her Len's book. And it's interesting when you get different CISO perspectives, because one of the things I try to get folks and board members to realize is somebody like Len could be sitting on a train next to you, right? And you got your little ID badge hanging from your lanyard or your neck. I mean, a wave of his hand and bippity boppity boop, he's got absolutely everything. So getting people to know that those kind of risks are out there and how can we defend against that? For example, as a result of Len, I don't give my phone to anybody, right? Because he's got a puck installed in his hand, that an NFC puck. The second your phone touches his hand, I mean, you're gone in like 60 seconds or less. You're completely owned. He's opening up persistent browser attacks and downloading things and just doing a lot of screwery. So it's really interesting trying to get CISOs to understand, or even board level executives to understand that like there are so many risks that are out there in the world of technology. how do we minimize those risks? How can we take the proper steps that are more foundational, right, that will last 10, 20, 30 years, which zero trust is a thing, but we also live in a world where it's really hard to not trust humans, right? Because we're a trusting species. And just having that evolution of kind of going from a world of pre-internet days to a world where people have the glasses with the cameras in them that are recording. If you're ever interested, I'll tell you an interesting story about an Intel operation I observed at a very prominent RSA party, which was fun.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were there at, are you familiar with RSA as the conference, or RSAC is now their new name?
Mm-hmm.
Out there, I went out there last year. Great conference, great opportunity to just be around stellar peers. And me and a couple of friends, we went to a happy hour at one of the local hotel lobby bars. And I think it was the St. Regis. We were at the St. Regis having some beverages. This guy comes up and starts talking to us. And I notice he has the, not Google glasses, but the type of glasses with the camera. So I whispered to my friend in front of us, I said, hey, just, be aware of what you're going to say, because odds are that guy is likely recording. My friend decides to go, what? So she turns to the guy and she says, let me see your glasses. And she puts them on. This guy had dual heads-up displays on both of his glasses that he can control with his eye movement and select and click. He was live, like super live speed, doing open source and closed source intelligence reading on every single person in the room. So if his glasses looked at you, it would show your name, your whatever information he wants to get to figure out, are you somebody worth talking to? And not only did he open source the information, he was getting a lot of closed source information and off the books information. So much so that my friend who put on his glasses, he said to her, good luck on starting your new job on Monday. She told like 2 people that she had accepted this role, and like nobody else knew. And here's this guy, and I look around the room and there's just tons of cyber executives and VPs and CEOs and CISOs and, a whole bunch of different people. And this guy had a whole team with him. I observed very clearly, he was doing the distracting and getting the intel, but he had 2 or 3 other people that were also scouting out the whole room. And I was like, oh my God, I just watched an entire intelligence operation at RSA. That's not the first time
Right.
I've seen stuff like that either.
Wow. This is crazy, Mike. Wow, this is crazy. I mean, here's another question. I mean, if this is what's available in public, the stuff that you know about, the stuff that you and I probably assume that it exists, but we rarely see it, and sometimes it shows up. What about the stuff we don't see? I mean, somebody told me that we are the laboratory. Humans are the laboratory. Data is collected off of us. Products are being designed, redesigned to fit certain parameters or certain characteristics that a human are asking for. It goes to, this thing has no end to it. Now, when you align all this and you say, okay, now I've got AI on top of it, I've got quantum, I've got third-party risk elements I need to figure out, how do I bring all this into a coherent strategy instead of a siloed strategy? Like, people are addressing it from a singularity perspective, but I think from a coherence perspective, you need an overall strategy to address it from those 3 pillars: AI, quantum, and some other stuff too.
And I'm glad you're talking about that, because in the last, I'll say 5 years, I've been talking a lot about quantum to the point where, local conferences I'm going to, and people are asking questions around quantum. And the folks who are, up on stage or in the panel are telling the audience, oh, that's a 6 to 10 year problem. And I'm like, don't know exactly when it's going to be a thing, but you need to start right now. This is not something that you can wait 5 to 10 years to talk about. As an organization, you may not take steps for post-quantum cryptography until, 2027, 2028. But it is a massive enterprise-wide soup to nuts change that is so broad that you have to start talking about this now. And I've been screaming about quantum for 3-4 years about no, this is not 6 to 10 years out. We need to figure this out now and understand how we're going to address it. The good thing about quantum is the government, I think it was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, came out with 4 different kinds of post-quantum cryptography that you could use and start to experiment with. So there is some level of guidance. When you add quantum computing and AI and just even smart software development or AWS infrastructure, there's a lot of screwery that can be done. And one of the things that we're facing now, and I don't think people realize, A, that it's a problem, and B, how quickly it's going to be a hockey stick scale of a problem. I could very easily look at an organization and create a very small system that would go out and automatically find all the board members, all their profiles, all their LinkedIns, all the public information that's available about anybody in an organization. And then I can build an entire autonomous attack surface that's going to go out and do the recon, do the intel work, probably send a couple of phishing emails, and it'll probably take me about an hour or two to set up, right? But an hour or two to set that all up, and then you click go, and then you just have all of these autonomous systems and automated systems that are going out and doing all the bad stuff, right? They're scraping your Instagram and your Facebook. They'll get a couple of audio and video clips so somebody can do a deep fake on you. They'll figure out, places that you frequent as an establishment so that maybe they want to do something in person, right? Maybe they want to steal a laptop because you work for a secret government clearance. Well, if I know where you're going or where you've been, just wait in the parking lot. When you go in, I'm going to jimmy the lock and boop, I got your laptop, right? And then you add things like Len, who's got 11 surgically implanted hacking devices underneath his skin. It's like, okay, so I'm often asked, how do we deal with all this? And I think you're correct. Having some very foundational principles are going to be key and important, because as technology evolves, the ones and zeros and the binary side of technology is going to continue to shock and awe us. I mean, I think the conversation we heard a long time ago is, if you were to look at technology today from 100 years ago, people would say it's absolute magic, right? Because it looks like magic. And now you have AGI systems, artificial general intelligence, that can kind of think and operate for themselves. And then you build in agentic systems where you could give agentic systems tasks to go out and do work. The threat landscape has never been more fun. I absolutely love this. Like, this is why I do this work, is there's so many different opportunities. But foundational principles, right? Do your best to institute a zero trust strategy. Trust nothing, verify twice. I mean, that's a saying from Winchcore Tower. I think I have a sticker on my water bottle.
That's right. That's what he said. Yeah.
Yeah. Trust nothing, verify twice. Also, challenge your own assumptions, right? Just because something is on digital, you can FaceTime somebody with a deep fake. It's still more theory than it is like open practice. The ability to manipulate anything digitally, anything, voice, video, data, files, output, input, it's only going to continue to evolve, right? So have some foundational principles. Don't click on shit. If you don't know what it is, don't touch it. This is where I'm hoping the work we're doing at the Cognitive Security Institute will help, because we say don't click on things. We say, read through the emails and all that other stuff. But go back to what we said earlier, where a high percentage of the problems are tied to the human element. We've really got to start getting technology more designed to not go against human behavior, right? We know humans are curious. We know humans are going to click on things. We know humans are going to do things or visit sites or, when they shouldn't. If we know all of that, why are the systems still so designed to chastise and punish humans when they make a bad decision or do something incorrectly? Redesign the systems to understand a lot more about human behavior and make it more frictionless, and then institute some of those foundational principles, MFA, multi-factor authentication, don't trust anything. And ideally, in a world with infrastructure and technology, there's way too much trust. Most of this technology was built where it's trust everything and only deny what you think is bad, right? And it should be the inverse. It's trust nothing and only allow what you want or what you think you want to allow to communicate.
No, you're trying to address the problem at the source, which is very logical. Address it at the design level of all applications, software or technology. That's you would think this is like 101 for any designer, to make sure that we're designing things. But I mean, I don't blame them, because the go-to objective for anything now, technology or any startup or any new applications being launched, is one thing, I guess: make some money, sell it to somebody, get the company to be acquired by somebody else.
One thing is addiction.
Yeah, that's right. And within all this is just address what is the customer or the user's wanting or craving, or that whole convenience thing. Nobody wants to do anything anymore, Mike. I mean, if you ask somebody to write a good prompt on AI, they don't want to do that anymore. They just want to write something very silly and expect effective results. I deal with that on a day-to-day basis. Oh, AI doesn't work. Well, why is that? Let me take a look at your prompt. I look at the prompt and say, what did you ask? There's no instructions in here. People are looking for that. I mean, human in general are looking for that immediate satisfaction. I go to my Apple store, I buy the phone, I press a button, it works. That's it. That's all I need to know. And that gives the designer a limited ability or limited capabilities in terms of how much do I need to get the human involved in selecting what they need to select when they're working with the technology that I'm going to put in their hands. So they realized by since the 1990, when things started to kick off in terms of internet, in terms of people developing application, etc. The key was to make people's life easier. And by making people's life easier, I think we made them a little bit lazy. And in the same time, we made them a little bit less inquisitive. They just press a button and they get an answer, and that's it. I don't need to answer. I need to know the answer because I know where the answer is in that button.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's going back to the behavioral psychology side of things. It's really interesting, some of the studies that have been coming out about AI is effectively making us dumber. It's making us not as inquisitive. It's making us accept mediocre output of an LLM system as Bible and truth, right? I'm not sure where this is all going to end up, to be honest, because we're certainly, talk about risk management. We are at a really big inflection point, I think, in human history, both geopolitically, technology-wise, warfare-wise. I mean, it's a beautiful time to be alive. I mean, there's plenty of opportunity for solutions that are out there. But it's like, how can we manage more of that human psychology so that we can leverage these technology and tools to enhance our lives, but not be so dependent on them that when those technology and tools and systems are not working, it's catastrophic. And we talked about healthcare for a while. One of the big things that I learned in healthcare is when our systems were down, right? Because we used to develop the medical record systems that were used in emergency room departments and ORs and all things. If our systems were down, that meant that the healthcare institution had to go on manual procedures, pen and paper. And I know from talking to a lot of healthcare CISOs and folks in the industry that when there's a big outage or a ransomware issue in a healthcare institution, there's not enough paper in the Staples and Targets. Like literally, they'll send people out to the stores to buy up all the paper and they still can't have enough paper. Then when all that outage window is done, maybe it's an hour for software maintenance or maybe it's a day because of a ransomware problem, they have to take all that they did on paper and still backdate it and put it all in the electronic medical record system, right? We're so dependent on this technology as a human now that it's really hard to kind of extrapolate or separate us from the technology. The next 20 years, we'll see where it goes for sure. Is it going to be more reliance on technology, less reliance? I think we're seeing a splintering of technology. You're starting to see more of like an Eastern and a Western technology that is kind of, getting out there in the world. So I don't know where it's all going to land, but I'm here for the fun. So let's go.
It's going to be a fun ride, that's for sure. Well, hopefully it's not catastrophic, as you mentioned earlier. Hopefully it's fun. Now, just my last question. I know we mentioned it earlier. Are we sleepwalking? I'd love to get your opinion on this one. I know Win says we're sleepwalking to it, but I don't know what you stand on this one. Are we sleepwalking toward a digital Pearl Harbor?
I believe that very, very deep. Like I get chills when I'm thinking about that. I don't approach these things from a fear, sky's falling, redcoats are coming, tinfoil hat kind of a deal. I do my best to approach things from a first principles perspective. But when you deal at the national security level and you work for $1 million, billion, and $1 trillion companies that are as large as other countries, you get to see and be exposed to a lot of different things. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. I'm surprised we have not had some sort of a digital Pearl Harbor. I'm surprised we have not had more devastating attacks like a 9/11 in this country. I don't want it to happen by any means, and I will die a happy man being proven incorrect on this. But I think my opinion is I think we're walking into more than just a digital Pearl Harbor. With the shifts that are going on geopolitically in the world, I mean, these are 1,000-year chess moves that have been moving for the last, I'm going to say since 2018 is when my mind really started opening up to some of this stuff. And I think it's more than a digital Pearl Harbor. I think a digital Pearl Harbor will most likely be followed by terrorist attacks and lone gunmen and some other things to really just disrupt our way of life, not just here in America, right? And all over the world, all over Europe. My outlook is risk-based, right? I look at the upside and the downside risks, and there's plenty of upside risks that are great. There's a lot of downside risks right now. That's one of the things that I've been trying to get people to prepare for a little bit more, right? How do we get the individual, the household, not just the organization, but the individual in the household to prepare for things like massive outages and power disruption because a bad actor went in and just destroyed a whole bunch of things. I was at a cyber civil defense summit last summer in Washington, D.C. It was put on by UC Berkeley, and Craig from Craigslist was the sponsor. And it was an entire day to talk specifically about the threats to our water supply. And just, I look at all aspects of critical infrastructure. It's telecommunications, it's data centers, it's logistics and transportation. There's a lot of different aspects of it. We're at a very vulnerable spot right now. And if bad actors really wanted to do some screwery and pull a handprint grenade and just watch the world crumble, it's not hard to do, right? And no. I'll put a pin in this. I'll go back to a statement that was made by Jen Easterly when she was with CISA. And there was about 3 years ago, there's a great congressional hearing on the threats from China to the United States. It was just on the threats from the People's Republic of China. And in this testimony, there was two things that makes the hair on my arm stand up. One is China has been embedded in our critical infrastructure since at least 2014. At least 2014. With the analogy they used was their hand on a handpin grenade, just waiting to pull it at a time and place of their choosing. Think about technology. Okay, if wow. Folks have been embedded since 2014, that means that any backup that you would have that you think you would recover is already going to be corrupted, right? Because most companies keep backups for 3, 5, 7, no more than 10 years. So I hear Jen Easterly talk about that. And then she's also said in the same congressional testimony, it was Jen Easterly, General Nakasone, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and Harry Coker. I think he was NSA at the time. And their big thing was an everything, everywhere, all at once style attack, right? So
that's catastrophic.
That is catastrophic. And how do we prepare for that? How do we manage those risks? How do we manage those risks, but also culturally, how do we be okay with having really spicy, difficult conversations like that?
Absolutely. Mike, thank you so much for all this. I had so much fun with this conversation, to be honest with you. It's one of my favorite conversations when I talk about, this topic, because we're addressing a topic that is on everybody's mind. Everybody's thinking about it. And it needs to be talked about a lot more. It needs to bring the awareness up on every level. And Mike, I want to thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure is all mine, Rob. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for episode 179. Keep it going and invite me back for episode 1000.
Yeah, I would really love that. And you know what? I'm going to take this, and I don't know, I'll pass on the invitation to the three of you for a panel discussion at some point, if you guys are up for it, and then we'll do that.
Sign me up. I'm in it. Let's go.
I will. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. To the audience, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking part of this conversation, and I will see you at the next episode. Thanks.